Hello and welcome to Off the Ball this evening. Coming up on tonight's show, we've got Friday Night Racing, where I'll be joined in studio by our strength and conditioning coach Wayne Middleton to chat about his life in the sport. Johnny Ward will also be on the line from Limerick, chatting through all of the festive racing action. After 8, Joe will bring you some more of our best ofs from the year that was, including a feature interview with the boxing coach Adam Booth. Before that though, delighted to be joined for Friday Night Rugby by the Irish Independent's Rory O'Connor. How are you, Rory?
Not too bad, Neil.
Good Christmas?
Not too bad. Yourself?
Yeah, not too bad now at all, and a couple of nice games to get stuck into as well. Our rugby coverage, of course, is brought to you by Air Sport, the home of rugby in Ireland. Also, we're live on Facebook and Twitter, Periscope and YouTube as well at the moment. So get your rugby tweets and text into us, and you could be named our Heineken Star Comment of the Week. There are match day tickets and off-the-ball Heineken branded goodies for all of our winners throughout the season as well. Rory, I suppose the big one this weekend, it is in Thomond Park tomorrow afternoon, Munster against Leinster. And as we expected, the team news came in, and for the most part anyway, it's two sides pretty close to full strength.
Close to, yeah. I mean, I think if you look closely, you'll find big names missing here and there. And Peter O'Mahony, I think, in the Munster team is the big one. Probably the biggest name missing across both teams. And he'll be missed. But I think anytime you see Johnny Sexton in the Leinster team, it's almost the first one you go to see how seriously are Leinster going for this one. And when he's there for the game in Limerick, Munster are not in Leinster's conference. This is not necessarily a must-win game in the kind of the greater scheme of things for Leinster, but this shows that they have pinpointed this one as the biggest one of the three games. Maybe suits the way they're going to prepare for Europe as well. They might give them a rest next week against Ulster, but they've named a very formidable starting 15 with a probably less experienced bench to go down and try and win their 5th game against Ulster or against Munster in a row, which wouldn't go down well with the home crowd, I wouldn't imagine. Yeah,
and I think as well, a lot of people are just relieved to see two pretty good names, pretty good sides named, because the last couple of years we have had this stuff, the fans have been sold a pop here with this big rivalry, and it's weakened teams, whatever, but bear in mind Leinster won last year with what was allegedly their second string side, but it is something for the fans to look forward to. Peter O'Mahony, you mentioned there, he's missing. To clear up, that isn't an injury or anything like that. That is this is a player management situation where he's just sitting this one out.
As far as we're aware, I mean, there's been nothing of no suspicion of an injury in the last couple of weeks. They're quite front loaded him. Like, they get a certain amount. They're not told this is the game you can play, this is the game you can't. They're given a certain amount of minutes over the course of the season. At different parts, they're kind of told which weeks they should take breaks. Munster have obviously chosen to put Peter O'Mahony in quite early in the season, front load him so that he gets a run into Europe. It paid dividends. He's played really well, but they have to give him a break at some stage. We always talk about player management, but it's a frequent topic of conversation when I'm in here. He needs a break at some stage to make sure that he's ready for those Ireland games and for the European games for Munster. It's unfortunate that it's tomorrow night, because that is it's one of the biggest games of the season, and it's one, particularly in Munster's home calendar, it's a game that always sells out at home in Thomond Park. They've still got a pretty solid pack, but they will miss him. And I think, given the calibre of team that Leinster are sending down, I wonder will Johan van Graan regret the fact that he played him in some of those earlier games and didn't try and use his minutes in this game. But, we'll see.
Finian Wycherley is the man actually taking the 6th shirt tomorrow. I'm still unsure with Finian Wycherley. Is he a second row? Is he a back row? Which way are you leaning with him?
I think he's a lock, personally, and I think he will end up being a lock, but we've seen it with a lot of second rows over the years, that earlier in their career, Ian Henderson, Ty Burns played a fair bit at 6 as well. It's when they have the bit of pace about them before it gets ground down in the scrum, they get a bit of freedom, and it probably, when you lose Peter O'Mahony, you lose the line-out option as well. So if you stuck Arno Botha in there, probably doesn't necessarily have the same kind of jumping up capacity that Pete does. So you put a second row in, a second row come back row, and you've got Ty Burn there as well. They kind of do both jobs. So it gives a lot of mobility to the Munster pack, but it also gives that bit of line-out security, which they need, because their line-out hasn't been fantastic in recent weeks. And taking Peter O'Mahony out of a line-out that has been fantastic weakens it further. So he's a really exciting prospect. He's a guy that's impressed anytime I've seen him this season, albeit mostly in the second row, where I think his long-term future rests. But you can understand the logic in sticking him there.
Having the line-out option as well is going to be important, because like Devin Toner isn't playing tomorrow either, and that immediately takes a big part of the Leinster line-out out of the equation, and it gives Munster the chance maybe to put them under a bit of pressure. Defensively on lineouts, they are generally quite good. It's on their own ball. They've kind of been shaky over.
Yeah, and Sean Cronin's out as well, which means James Tracy's stepping in. They've been chopping and changing a bit. Brian Byrne played last week. There's that'll.
With Sean Cronin, do we think as well that's a game management situation?
I think so. He come off the bench.
Brilliant against Connacht.
Yeah, goes off the bench against Connacht, gets a rest this weekend, and probably starts against Ulster, and then that brings them in. They've all worked these blocks out strategically. Unless there's an injury, I think these selections have all been done, have all been predetermined, and the players know when they're off and on. And like, it is unfortunate, but I think we're used to it now. And to be honest, this game hasn't disappointed for the last couple of years. So, I'm still looking forward to it. There are a couple of names missing, but they rest Sean Cronin, but they still put Tyg Furlong and Cian Healy either side of James Tracy. So, they're getting clever at this, I think. They used to just rest players on block, but now Leinster in particular, who have the squad, are able to manage through this and not really feel a weakened team. They might be 70-80% of their first team, but it's still a pretty strong team. But I think you're right. I think they can get pressure on James Tracy. And they have big size in that pack, and they've decent sized lifters as well. But they need to be secure on their own ball, because that was a big problem against Cast. For all that we talked about, Joey Carberry's missed kicks, about the discipline, about Wayne Barnes and that stuff. The key line at the end of the game went astray, and Niall Scannell's a really good hooker, and it's a really strong part of his game. But there's a lot of moving parts, and it hasn't quite been going like a lot of things in Munster. Like, this is a really key game in Munster season, and that's one of the things that they need to get right this week. Yeah, and you say it's a key game as well. 2 defeats in a row. If they were, essentially a hop of a ball in it against Cast, whatever. But 2 defeats in a row. Lose this weekend, they're on 3. They're going to Connacht next week. You really don't want to be getting into a losing run, heading into what now looks like being a huge Champions Cup game against Gloucester in a few weeks' time. So, like, all of a sudden, these losses start to build up a little bit. And, okay, if they were to win tomorrow, it's a massive one for them. Yeah. It's absolutely huge to get back on track. But suddenly you just start to question yourself that little bit more when those losses start to come in. All season we've been asking where Munster at, and we haven't really got any answers. But in the last couple of weeks, the kind of negatives have started to come to the fore. And you don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater. You don't want to panic and kind of write them off at all, because they are going fine. They're still top of their pool. They're still second in the conference, albeit they've lost a little bit of ground to Glasgow. And you've got 2 fronts. You need to be getting that home semi-final, towards the end of the season in the Pro 14. The Pro 14 gets written off around this time of year, but it is important to put yourself in as strong a position as possible, even for next year's European Champions Cup. So the next 4 games are basically going to define their season, I think. You've got Leinster at home, locked and loaded, coming down with Johnny Sexton. You get that win, you put a whole charge of electricity through the organisation. You march to Connacht next week in fine form. Connacht are probably going to have to do a bit of resting next week, because they've gone pretty strong in their 2 games, but still they lost in the sports ground last season, Munster, so that's got a difficult game. And then that Gloucester away game on a Friday night will define our European season, or at least will set up the Exeter game, which again, you're rolling on. So they've put themselves in a position where they're in must-win territory, certainly in Europe, and these these Pro 14 games would be very handy to win games, because once you start losing ground in those games, Connacht are breathing down their necks in the conference as well. They've put themselves in a bit of a difficult position. Leinster are 16 points clear. They didn't need to send this full-strength team down to Poland today or tomorrow. They could pretty much sack that off, but they have chosen not to. They've given themselves a bit of margin for error. Munster don't have that. Munster pretty much need to win all these games to keep their season ticking along, because on the face of it, on paper, it doesn't look like a bad season. But there's a little bit of signs that it's going south a little bit in recent weeks, and it's well within their gift to arrest that slide. And winning against Leinster at Thomond Park would be ideal. Yeah, like how much would that do tomorrow if Munster were to grind out a win? Like, absolutely just dog it out, get over the line, and all of a sudden, things are feeling so much better from a Munster point of view. The weight will come off. You can imagine what the scenes will be like in Thomond Park. Full house, all people back at home for Christmas. This is the game that they've kind of, they've bought their tickets for a long time ago. It's been sold out for ages. And yeah, it gives the whole organisation a lift. It gives the players a lift. It gives the fans a lift, and it just carries you through those next couple of weeks. And although Leinster went down there with it wasn't a B team by any means. It still had a lot of frontline players, but Sexton wasn't playing a number of others, and they were so dominant on Stevens' Day last year. It was such an impressive performance. It was like Dan Levy and a couple of others kind of forced their way into Six Nations reckoning and everything. It was like the birth of Jordan Larmour. Yeah, exactly. I know he had done it in a few other games previously, but that was everyone's watching. Laid on. That was the day everyone. It was the same at Ringrose 3 years ago. Everyone watches this game. This game is one of the few Pro 14 games that captures everyone's imagination, and it'll be interesting to see with this moved on there. Will it have the same impact? But hopefully it will, because it's such a big fixture, and I think that it is a fixture that with everyone watching, if you get a performance, you had a full house, you really can generate so much momentum out of it. And Munster should have beaten Leinster in the semi-final of the Pro 14 in May, and they should have won in the Aviva Stadium in October. when their scrum was so dominant and they created enough chances and didn't take them. But they were playing better back then than they are now. But they just need something to click and just to get a bit more, just a better attacking performance and improvements across the park, because just there's so many elements of their game that haven't been going full tilt, and yet they've still been close in recent weeks. That's, they're a good team not playing particularly well, and all it takes is one big performance to get that show going right in the right direction again.
Yeah, and one thing we will have tomorrow as well is Joey Carberry against Johnny Sexton, which we didn't have last time around at the Aviva Stadium. A lot of people looking forward to that, just to see how the kind of master against apprentice thing lines up.
Exactly, and with Conor Murray sitting there as well, makes life a bit easier for Carberry. He was coming in with a bit of pressure on his shoulders because of that Castres game and the 3 missed kicks, and I think one went out in the full as well. He was a bit off it that day, and he's down there. That's what we heard from the start. He's down there partly to learn and partly to get experience under his belt, but he's also expected by the Thomond Park faithful to produce. And this would be a perfect time to do it against his former team and against Johnny Sexton, who, players, it may seem fanciful that Johnny Sexton's the World Player of the Year and he's come off the best year of his career, and is in everyone's team of the year, and is everyone locked in for the Ireland team. But in Joey Carberry's mind, he thinks he can knock Johnny Sexton off the perch and get the number 10 shirt. He has to. That's the way players are built. So a big performance on tomorrow against his old province, against Johnny, will do a huge amount for him going into 2019, which is a massive year for him because he made this move all about 2019. Yeah. That's why he made the move. And for Sexton will have it in his head that I need a big performance against Joey Carberry. So the two of them motivated is fairly tantalising stuff. So that'll be worth watching, and very hard to, these players don't actually, we build up these key battles and they don't actually face off against each other. But we have seen Sexton go after opposition outhouse before. I remember George Ford about 4 or 5 years ago in the Six Nations was the coming man. Sexton emptied him in the game. It was either the England game and then the game against Bath in the quarter-final. He just went after him and hounded him.
Yeah, 2015 I think.
That's the one. So Sexton has the capacity to go and try and dominate. Whether he'll do it tomorrow, I don't know, but it's worth watching.
Also as well, I think one of the key pressure points tomorrow is going to be how James Lowe fares. Because I think generally the last time around, certainly at the Aviva Stadium, James Lowe was he was the difference between the sides on the day. I think back to last January as well at Thomond Park, he probably wasn't the deciding factor on the day, but he was absolutely excellent. Yeah. He was still fresh enough in the Leinster jersey at that stage. It was Darren Sweetenham who was kind of his opposite number last time around at the Aviva. Andrew Conway this weekend. If Munster can shut down James Lowe, I think they have a massive chance. If James Lowe has the freedom and if James Lowe is making yards constantly, it could be a long day. Yeah, and I don't think it's even necessarily a one-on-one shut down James Lowe. I think it's the supply. If Leinster can get the supply of ball, starting with the scrum and the ruck, if Munster can get an edge in either of those departments, it just puts pressure on Sexton getting the ball out the low. If Sexton gets an armchair ride, then James Lowe and Jordan Larmour and even Gary Ringrose, will have the time and space to do damage, and they can do damage like nobody else. And Lowe in particular just needs. We saw it in the Bath game at the Aviva, a quick tap. When Bath went to sleep after a pretty decent kind of period, went to sleep and he scores. He never dies with the ball, and he's always alive to any danger that he can create. He just causes havoc in opposition defences, and he's great to watch. And that was one of the first games he'd had in the Leinster jersey. Certainly the biggest early game he'd had, and that was when you realised that this is a guy Leinster. I know they ended up not being able to pick him for the big European games, but he gives them so much in attack. He's so exciting to watch. Conway's, it's a really good marker to see how far Conway's come, because I think he's had an excellent 2018 and is one of the form players carrying into next year's Six Nations. And I think Hoon Earls could be Munster's point of difference tomorrow. But that's a good battle, and Lowe just gives you so much. Even when Leinster are not playing well, like they were in the Aviva Stadium that day, they can just turn to him, give him the ball, and it's very simple. Just give him the ball and see what he can do with it. And not quite often he comes up with something. Very quickly on Conway, do you prefer to see him playing as a winger or a fullback? I'd like to see him get a bit more time at fullback, but they've clearly made the decision, and Ireland have made the decision that his future is on the wing. I'm not sure why that is. I haven't gotten. You see, I quite like him on the wing. I think. I think he's really good on the wing, but I think the extra bit of freedom. I always go back to Conway as a 20, and maybe that's naive at this stage. And I covered him as an under 20 over in Argentina at the World Cup, and he was light and quick, and he just has that extra, like Carberry when he plays fullback, like Larmour when he plays fullback. When he looks up from the fullback position and he has the full field to choose from, he's so often picked the right options, but. He's become a really, really excellent winger who's really good at the nuts and bolts, and I think gets a lot of praise for his nuts and bolts work, but is more than capable of spectacular stuff as well. So, no,
I would like to see him get and go there, but Haley has settled in well there. But I thought when Zebo went, I thought Conway would fill that void. But between Johan van Graan and Joe Schmidt, they've clearly both made the decision that they see him as a right winger, and they probably have better rugby minds. They have better rugby minds than I do. So they've obviously put a lot of thought into that and come up with that as their call.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to seeing Dan Goggin tomorrow as well, alongside Rory Scanlon in the centre, because he had a run, started the season, some very, very good games, performed brilliantly in Exeter in the first round of the Champions Cup, and then got that injury against Gloucester the second day out. And at the time, it looked a lot worse than it ultimately ended up being. So I'm just curious to see how he gets on tomorrow afternoon, because he's very, very physical in the centre.
He was really good in this fixture in the Aviva as well, and we saw how good Munster were when Farrell was in there. Just briefly, we got a little glimpse of him, and I'm not saying Goggin is quite where Farrell is yet, but he has a lot of the physical capabilities.
Certainly as a carrier, he's
so direct.
Very strong.
Yeah, he's so direct, and he just gets you going forward. Now, I think Leinster have had a few issues with their centres. I think when Reid and Ringrose were there was possibly a bit of a size problem, and they've put in Rory O'Loughlin, who was more of a 13 in my mind, but it has slotted into 12. It's just a really physical player, and you wouldn't be surprised to see him man mark Goggin a little bit tomorrow. But I think Goggin still has the capacity when he comes down to the ball at pace. He's very hard to stop, and he's got good footwork as well. You'd like to see him maybe add a little bit of offloading in there, but that'll come, I think. So no, he's a really exciting. He's more than a prospect. He's here now, and he's getting a start in a big game. I think we're going to see Farrell. Just reading some stuff this morning. Farrell will be back next week, and that gives so much to Munster going to Gloucester the following week. They have a lot of big ball carrying centres. Jaco Taude started up in. He captained the team up in Ravenhill. So
Sam Arnold as well.
And Arnold as well. Yeah, and Arnold's having he made his Ireland debut last month. So they have a lot of options there. At the same time, their backline probably hasn't clicked as well since either when Farrell or Goggin were in the team, because so much of it relies on getting over the game line. And if you have a big carrier like him, it just gives you so much.
And before we move on to Ulster and Connacht this evening, I think a man who's going to be fairly central tomorrow, Frank Murphy, the referee.
Yeah.
Given the events of the last couple of weeks, 2 red cards that should have been in Cast, a red card last week that should have been in Ulster. The first borderline thing that happens in that match tomorrow, the Thomond Park crowd are going to be all over Frank Murphy.
Yeah, and it's interesting just to see a former Munster player ref in Munster, which is, like we saw Alan Roland referee this fixture about 5 or 6 years ago, and Anthony Foley wasn't particularly happy about it. But maybe that just set a norm in place that, we trust referees to be neutral and all sort of. It's an interesting pressure on his shoulders, but I don't doubt he can overcome it. His role is, unfortunately, in all these games, there's these big decisions. We always seem to end up talking about referees, and Munster have had their fair share of bad decisions against them in the last couple of weeks. It's fair to say. I think that the Balakoon one on the weekend was very much a straight red. First minute changes the whole thing. You can't use it as an excuse because it's still 15-on-15. You've still got every opportunity to go and win the game, but at the same time you can feel hard done by. And then Cast was Cast. I mean, it was mayhem. So. You just hope that he is able to get a fair handle on it, that we aren't talking about it next week, that we're able to be talking about. There's so many Ireland storylines, so many subplots going on, that both teams come away from it knowing that they gave it their best shot and they lost because their best shot wasn't good enough, rather than blaming a referee. And Murphy's he's relatively. He's been on the scene for a couple of years now. He's been in the big game cauldron as a player. It doesn't always translate into being a top quality ref, but it should give him the game sense and the kind of empathy that to be able to get on with the players on the pitch as well. So hopefully he has a good game and allows the players to thrive, because the forecast is pretty good for tomorrow. This calm weather we're getting should make for a really good game. And the last couple of Munster-Leinster games, I think there was a bit of a lull where they cancelled each other out. Last couple of years they've been really good games, and I think it's one to really look forward to.
If we're going to call it tomorrow,
I think Leinster's starting 15 is strong enough to get the job done, but if it comes down to it, their bench, I think they can get it far enough ahead that they can take their bench out of the equation. But I'd give Munster a fighting chance, but Leinster just about.
Okay. Of course, our rugby coverage is brought to you by Air Sport, the home of rugby in Ireland. Now, the other big derby this weekend is actually happening shortly enough tonight. 7:35 kickoff at the sports ground between Connacht and Ulster. Two sides in pretty good form, Rory. Even if you take aside Connacht's defeat to Leinster last week, that was their second defeat in 7 matches. Ulster, they're going for their 5th win in a row tonight. And as well, they've both put out pretty decent teams, similar enough to Munster and Leinster, save for a couple of guys who've been held back.
Yeah, and Ulster were probably one of the guiltiest parties of resting entire teams and sending complete B teams off down the country to get, and I suppose it came back to bite them in Thomond when they got that record defeat a couple of months ago. But looking at those teams that are playing tonight, that's not a bad Ulster pack.
No, certainly not.
And Ulster got absolutely battered by Connacht up front in Kingspan when they lost for the first time since the 60s.
Yeah.
Earlier this season. But they've McFarland being a prop himself, that would be, their struggling scrum over the course of the first half of the season would have been a real, would have been niggling away at him, and he seems to have gotten it right, and he found a bit of a gem in Eric O'Sullivan.
I was actually just about to bring him up as well, because the last 6 weeks or so in particular, I've absolutely loved watching him play.
Yeah.
And even, I think it was at the Phillips Sports Awards, Joe Schmidt name-checked Eric O'Sullivan as someone who could, I think as he said, could make an impact in 2019. He's definitely one to watch. Absolutely,
and he's a guy who's gone up from Ulster, having missed out on Leinster, Leinster honours, and has been there for a little while. I think he's 23, 24. Like he's no spring chicken in the kind of the way we've seen academy players burst onto the scene in other provinces. But he's worked at his game. He's worked away. He's not small. He's well able to cope in this level. Maybe those extra couple of years have helped him to be ready to play at this level, and.
A modern prop as well, gets around, makes a lot of tackles.
No, absolutely.
A lot of tackles.
He's not a one-trick pony, but he's good at that. He's good at the core trick that he needs to be at, because it's no use being anything else when you're a prop if you can't scrummage.
Yeah.
We've seen a number of Ulster players who could throw offloads and do things around the park in the front row, but couldn't do the nuts and bolts. And you put him alongside Rob Herring and Marty Moore tonight. Nagel seems to have found a bit of form since he went up there, which he had a poor enough start to the season with Leinster, and it was no surprise to see him head elsewhere. Probably a bit of a surprise to see him put his third province together.
Yeah.
But he seems to have found a form. Treadwell's playing well, and they've got Coetzee at number 8, and Coetzee just gives you go forward. So I think it's only recently that Ulster ever considered Connacht, anywhere near, as someone that could beat them. I mean, Ulster always beat Connacht, home and away. It was a given, and I'm sure they'd like to get back to that place where they can. And McFarland knows Connacht very well as well. He played it down after during the week, but he knows all those players really well. He worked with most of them, so
even up until 3-4 years ago.
Yeah, absolutely, and would have kept a close eye. Would have been involved with Glasgow playing against them as well. Connacht will be absolutely fuming at the way things finished at the RDS, and will have a massive point to prove, and have picked a very strong team with Farrell and Aki just are worth watching. They're just magic together, and Jack Carty's having a fantastic season, and they have the pack to kind of gain parity. But it's going to be a good game. It's going to be really, really close affair, and I give Ulster a decent shout of getting a result up there.
Yeah, and just even looking at as I mentioned earlier, Connacht 5 wins from 7. I think I brought it up earlier in the week. Both of the 2 defeats in those 7 games, they were leading into the red. One against the Ospreys and one, of course, last week at the RDS. To change the table around, look, if they'd hung on and won those games, they're second in Conference A, and they would be 8 points clear of the Ospreys, who would be 4th.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden, they're looking fantastic for a Champions Cup place. They're still in a very good place to potentially get a Champions Cup spot. And looking at the table as well, like a win for Ulster tonight, they're kind of consolidating second place with the Ospreys playing, or with the Scarlets playing tomorrow away to Cardiff. So there's a lot on the line, even way more so than just provincial bragging rights or anything.
Oh, absolutely.
Like, just categorically on the table, it's shaping up to be a great game.
Well, they're breeding down Munster's necks in conference. Conference A is, it's very, very compressed, and there is.
Connacht win tonight, they go ahead of Munster for the time being at least.
Yeah, absolutely, and the Welsh teams are struggling. Munster are having their issues in the Pro 14. They're kind of been able to run up big scorelines at home, but they've been struggling on the road a bit, and teams seem to be putting out their A teams at home against them. So there's no Connacht have the luxury of not having the Champions Cup this year. A bit like the year they won the league, they're able to kind of rotate and give opportunity during the Challenge Cup windows and still get results. But they're able to put everything into the Pro 14, and that's a massive advantage. We've seen it in the Premier League. The year Leicester won it, the year Chelsea won it. If you're not in the Champions League in the Premier, it's a massive advantage. And the same thing is happening in the Pro 14. So they're making full use of that. They got 2 points out of the RDS, which in many years would be a good result. But the way it happened was heartbreaking. 5. But they got to take the first 70 minutes of that and go, hang on a second. We lived with a team. It may not have been Leinster's first team, but it's a team that have gone and beaten some good teams home and away in the last couple of weeks.
And tore them open.
Absolutely, and they dominated them. They dominated them physically. There's a lot to like about this Connacht team under Andy Friend. There's really a good vibes going on. It would be hard to be anything else after last season, but they they seem to be going in a really good direction, and they have to grasp this opportunity, because you're right, they could get ahead of Munster, and then there's no guarantee Munster winning tomorrow, and suddenly you're going into the new year in a really strong position, and you got to think Champions Cup, you've got to think playoffs, you've got to think we won this competition 3 years ago, let's be ambitious. So, and they are ambitious down there, and they're putting together a nice team, and if they can keep their strong players fit, they're a match for anyone.
Mm-hmm. And just finally, before we wrap up as well, Henry Spate, his last game for Ulster, he's played 11 matches, 3 tries. He'll be going back to the Brumbies for the new Super Rugby season. Despite the fact that they only had him for half a season, excellent bit of business.
It's actually it's a real shame he's going back. I know he's blocking Irish players, and I understand the reasons behind it, but I think Ulster need a leg up this season.
Yeah.
And I'm disappointed that they weren't able. Maybe he probably wants to go home and play in the World Cup. In fairness to him, he probably wants a full Super Rugby season. Maybe they weren't able to convince him. Maybe they were given permission. I'm not sure. But just from an Irish rugby point of view, he was one of these guys who's come over and bought into it straight away and produced. And he's been really good. And in some of those games that Ulster won by 1 or 2 points, he came up with big plays in the build-up.
I thought the Scarlets game over in Wales a couple of weeks ago. The round 3 game in the Heineken Champions Cup. I thought that was his best performance for them.
He leaves them in a better place than he found them, and that's all you can ask for. And it's a pity from their point of view that they don't have him, but at the same time, they're probably set up well to cope without him now, much better than they were when he came over, and he has had an impact. And I wonder, after the World Cup, will they have capacity? Obviously they need RFU approval and all that sort of stuff, but he's made an impact, and the fans love him, and it's been a good signing. It's probably worked out well for both of them. He probably goes back to the Brumbies in good form and with a good chance of making that Australian squad, which is looking easier to do by the week.
Okay, and in a quick word, how's this going to go tonight?
Connacht are raging off favourites in the bookies, and probably at home, with the anger that they brought home from Dublin, I can understand that, but I think Ulster could go up and nick it. I like to look at that Ulster pack, and I think they, having been bullied in that first game up in Kingspan, they'll have a point to prove as well.
Okay, Rory O'Connor, thanks for stopping in. Enjoy Thomond Park tomorrow, and Happy New Year to you as well.
You too, and all the listeners.
Okay, guys, that's it for Friday Night Rugby. Coming up next, it's Friday Night Racing.